The first thing anyone noticed about Captain Zara Akafer was that she never raised her voice. In a world full of commanders who barked and bellowed and slammed fists on tables to make their point, Zara spoke in the same quiet, measured tone whether she was ordering coffee or ordering an airstrike. Her subordinates found it unsettling at first. Then they found it reassuring. Then they found it terrifying because they realized that the quieter she got, the more dangerous the situation was, and by the time her voice dropped to barely above a whisper, things had already gone catastrophically wrong. On the morning of March 14th, things had gone catastrophically wrong. It started the way disasters always start, not with a single explosion but with a series of small failures that compounded on each other like dominoes falling in slow motion. A miscommunication between two intelligence units. A satellite feed that went dark for 11 minutes at exactly the wrong time. A local contact who turned out to be working three sides of a conflict that officially only had two. And then, before anyone at Central Command fully understood what was happening, 480 United States Marines were trapped inside the city of Al-Rashid, a dense urban labyrinth of narrow streets and ancient buildings in a country that the official briefings described as stabilized, and the reality described as anything but. Zara was not supposed to be in Al-Rashid. She was supposed to be in a command center 40 kilometers away, coordinating logistics for a supply convoy that was now the least of anyone's problems. She'd been in Al-Rashid for a medical check on 3 wounded Marines from a previous operation when the city sealed itself around them like a fist closing. Within 20 minutes of the first shots, every exit route was compromised. Within 40 minutes, communications with Central Command were degraded to the point of uselessness. Within an hour, the 480 Marines scattered across 8 different positions throughout the city were cut off, outnumbered, and running low on options. Zara had options. She always had options. It was the thing her commanding officer, General Harlan Drake, had said about her in the fitness report that nobody was supposed to read but everyone had. He'd written that Captain Akafer operated in crisis the way a chess grandmaster operated at a board, seeing combinations 5 moves ahead while everyone else was still figuring out where the pieces were. He'd also written that she had the emotional thermostat of a glacier, which he meant as a compliment and which Zara took as one. She was 31 years old, Nigerian-American, born in Lagos and raised in Atlanta, the daughter of a surgeon and an engineer who had given her 2 things above all others: an absolute intolerance for problems without solutions and a bone-deep belief that the most important room in any building was the one you could see the most from. That second belief was why she was on the roof. The building was a 4-story former textile warehouse on the eastern edge of Al-Rashid's market district. It had thick walls, small windows, and a flat roof with a 2-foot parapet that ran around the perimeter. Zara had commandeered it 30 minutes into the siege because it gave her line of sight to 3 of the 8 Marine positions, and more importantly, because its roof had a direct sightline to the radio tower on the hill north of the city, which was the only communications asset still partially functional. With her on the roof were Staff Sergeant Dominique Reyes, a Cuban-American communications specialist from Miami who could rebuild a field radio from spare parts and profanity, and Corporal Tund Ademi, a 22-year-old sniper from Houston who hadn't said more than 40 words in the 3 hours since this started but whose eyes missed nothing. Below them, in the warehouse itself, were 11 more Marines and 14 local civilians who had taken shelter when the shooting started. Among the civilians were 3 children, a grandmother who had not stopped praying in 2 hours, and a man named Farid who claimed to know every street in this city and who had already proven that claim twice. The situation as Zara understood it was this: a coalition of armed factions, 3 separate groups that had been fighting each other for 2 years and had apparently reached a temporary agreement this morning, had coordinated a simultaneous action to trap the Marine presence in Al-Rashid and force a political crisis that would embarrass the Allied government and demonstrate that American forces could be made to look helpless. They didn't necessarily want to kill 480 Marines. What they wanted was footage, images, the visual of American military power humiliated in a confined space, unable to move, unable to respond, waiting to be negotiated out like hostages. Zara had no intention of providing that footage. She had 7 problems and she was working through them in order of urgency. First problem was communications. Central Command needed to know the situation, and they needed to know it in detail, not the degraded fragments that had been getting through. Second problem was the Marines at Position 3, a school building 2 kilometers northeast, who were taking the heaviest fire and were down to 40 minutes of ammunition at current expenditure rates. Third problem was Position 6, a marketplace on the western edge, where a Marine corporal had made a decision under pressure that had accidentally blocked the only vehicle exit on that side of the city with 2 disabled trucks. Fourth problem was the faction snipers who had taken elevated positions on 3 buildings ringing the warehouse, not shooting yet, watching, waiting, which was almost worse. Fifth problem was the civilians downstairs, specifically the 3 children, specifically what happened to them if this building became a primary target. Sixth problem was the Joint Faction Command post that Farid had identified as being in a hammam 3 blocks north, which was where the coordination for this whole operation was coming from, and which, if disrupted, would cause the 3 factions' temporary cooperation to collapse, because their cooperation was the only thing making this work, and their cooperation was also, Farid had told her with absolute certainty, extremely fragile. Seventh problem was General Drake, who she knew was losing his mind 40 kilometers away, and who she needed to prevent from ordering a relief operation before she was ready, because a relief convoy moving into Al-Rashid right now without her coordination would drive straight into the 3 ambush positions she'd already identified on the main approach roads. She started with problem 1. Dominique had been working the radio for 90 minutes. She'd managed intermittent contact twice. Enough to confirm the situation, but not enough to transmit coordinates or tactical details. Now she looked at Zara with an expression that said she'd tried everything she knew. Zara crouched next to her. Walk me through the interference pattern. It's not standard jamming, it's layered. Someone knows what they're doing. Can you punch through with burst transmission? Maybe 15 seconds, maybe 20. Zara thought for 3 seconds. Do it. I'll give you the message in 60 characters or less. Dominique stared at her. 60 characters. Everything Drake needs to know to not get 480 people killed. 60 characters. Give me the radio. She took the handset and wrote on a piece of paper. While she wrote, she was simultaneously watching the building across the street where she'd identified a faction observer 2 hours ago. The observer had shifted position in the last 10 minutes, which meant something was changing, which meant problem 4 was about to move up the urgency list. She handed the paper to Dominique. The message read, 8 pose intact. Do not send relief. Hold 4H. Trust me. Zara. Dominique looked at it. That's it. That's everything, Zara said. Send it on burst. Then immediately switch frequencies and send it again. Dominique sent it. Whether it got through, they wouldn't know for 20 minutes. Zara moved to the north parapet and looked toward the radio tower. Then she looked at Tund. She said, the observer on the 3rd floor of the blue building. Southwest corner window. How long has he been on the phone? Tund had the scope to his eye. 4 minutes. He's reporting our position. Which means they're deciding something, Zara said. She turned to Dominique. How many smoke grenades do we have? 6. She thought. Then she said, I need you to go downstairs and ask Farid something. Ask him which building in this block besides this one has the best view of the hammam to the north. Dominique disappeared down the stairs. Zara turned back to the city. In the middle distance, the sound of gunfire from position 3 had intensified. She looked at her watch. 38 minutes of ammunition now. She needed to solve problem 2 faster than she'd planned. She pulled out her map, which was a printed satellite image from 4 days ago and already partially outdated because cities changed, and wars changed them faster. She looked at the route between the warehouse and position 3. Direct route was impossible, 3 choke points, all likely covered. Eastern route went through an alley system that Farid had described as a maze. Western route crossed an open square that the sniper on the building to her left could see from his position. She looked at the open square again. Then she looked at the sniper position. Then she looked at the smoke grenades. Then she had an idea that was going to require Tund to do something that was technically outside the rules of engagement, but was going to save 40 Marines' lives if it worked. She explained it to him in 90 seconds. Tund listened without expression. When she finished, he said, "That's going to work." She hadn't asked him if it would work. She appreciated that he said so anyway. Dominique came back up from downstairs. She said, "Farid says the pharmacy on the corner of the next block. 2 stories, but the second floor has a clear sightline to the hammam because the building between them was damaged in a strike 2 years ago and never rebuilt." Zara stood up. She said, "I need 3 people willing to move through the alley system to the pharmacy. They need a radio." Dominique said, "I'll go." Zara looked at her. "You're too valuable here. Send Martinez and Ochoa. Give them the secondary radio and these coordinates." She wrote a grid reference. "Tell them when they get eyes on the hammam, they sit and watch and don't do anything until they hear from me." Dominique nodded and went back downstairs. Zara turned back to the city. The gunfire from position 3 had been steady for the last 6 minutes. She pressed her fingers against the parapet and went through the sequence in her head. Step 1. Smoke the square to move the resupply team toward position 3. Step 2. Tund's action to remove the sniper who could see the square, which needed to happen in the 30 seconds before the smoke grenaded, which needed to happen. Step 3. The resupply team needed to actually be ready to move, which meant she needed to get a message to position 3 right now, and communications were still degraded. She looked at the radio tower again. Then she looked at the building directly east of the warehouse. It was lower, 2 stories, and its roof was accessible from the warehouse roof via a 6-foot gap that could be jumped. She looked at the gap. She looked at the radio tower. The tower was mounted on the hill to the north, and its receiver array faced south-southwest, directly toward where she was standing. If she could get to the east building's roof and climb the water tower on that building's northeast corner, she would be approximately 9 meters higher than she was now, and in a direct line of sight with the tower's primary receiver. She picked up the radio handset. She looked at Tund. "Cover me." He didn't ask where she was going. He just moved to cover the eastern approach. Zara ran to the east parapet. She looked at the gap. 6 feet, maybe 7. A 2-foot height differential, the far building being lower. She backed up 5 paces. Then she ran and jumped. She cleared the gap with a foot to spare, landed hard, rolled, came up running. The east roof was covered in old satellite dishes and AC units, a maze of obstacles she moved through without slowing. She reached the water tower in 12 seconds. It was a cylindrical metal tank on 4 legs, with a maintenance ladder up one side. She grabbed the first rung and climbed. At the top of the water tower, she was 11 meters above the street and in what she calculated to be a direct line with the radio tower's receiver. She keyed the handset. She said in a rapid, precise burst, "Command, this is Akafar al-Rashid, 8 positions intact. Do not send relief convoy. Roads compromised at grid references Delta 7, Echo 2, Foxtrot 9. Position 3 needs resupply via Western Alley. I need 40 minutes, do you copy?" Static. Then, in the unmistakable voice of General Drake, who sounded like a man who had aged 10 years in 3 hours, she heard, "We copy, Akafar. What do you need?" She told him, precisely, efficiently. In the time it took most people to explain one problem, she explained all 7 and the solutions she'd already developed for 5 of them. Drake listened without interrupting, which was not something he was known for doing. When she finished, he said, "You've got 40 minutes. Then I'm sending everything I have." 40 minutes is enough, Zara said. She climbed back down. What followed in the next 39 minutes would be discussed at the Naval War College 3 years later as a case study in decentralized command and creative tactical problem-solving under degraded conditions. The written analysis would use phrases like exceptional situational awareness and unconventional resource utilization and demonstrated ability to maintain operational coherence across multiple simultaneous problem sets. What the written analysis would not fully capture was the texture of those 39 minutes as they actually happened, because written analyses never did. Tons action happened at minute 4, clean, precise. The square was safe. The smoke went at minute 5. 3 grenades, positioned to create a corridor of obscured sightline across the square. The resupply team, 4 Marines carrying ammunition from the warehouse stores, moved through the smoke in 40 seconds. They disappeared into the alley system. Zara tracked their progress on the map by radio check-ins every 90 seconds. At minute 11, Martinez called from the pharmacy roof. She had eyes on the Hammam. Zara told her to wait. At minute 14, the resupply team reached position 3. The firing rate from position 3 changed immediately, became more measured, more deliberate, which meant they were no longer burning through ammunition in desperation and had started making choices. At minute 17, Farid appeared on the roof. He had climbed up on his own initiative, which was not what Zara had asked him to do, but which she acknowledged with a nod because she didn't have time to address it. He told her something she hadn't known. He said that the leader of the central faction, a man named Qasim, was not actually in the Hammam. He was in a building adjacent to the Hammam, a bakery, because he was paranoid and never stayed where his communications suggested he was. And the bakery had a side entrance that opened onto a street that was not covered by any of the faction checkpoints. Zara looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Then she said, "Show me on the map." He showed her. At minute 22, Zara made a decision that General Drake would later describe as either the most reckless or the most brilliant thing he'd seen in 30 years of service, depending on his mood when he told the story. She took Tund, Farid, and a Marine corporal named Sylvester Anand, who had grown up speaking 3 languages and turned out to speak a 4th that was relevant to this situation, and she moved through the alley system toward the bakery. They moved in single file. Tund first, then Farid, then Anand, then Zara. The alleys of Al-Rashid were narrow enough that they moved in shadow even in the middle of the day. They crossed 2 faction patrol routes, both of which Farid knew the timing of because he'd been watching them since the morning. They reached the bakery's side entrance at minute 28. Zara didn't go in shooting. That was the part of the story that people always got wrong when they retold it later. She went in talking. Anand knocked on the door. When it opened, he spoke in the relevant 4th language for 45 seconds. Then they were inside. What happened in the bakery in the following 9 minutes was never fully described in any official report, and Zara never spoke about it in detail except once, to a journalist who agreed not to publish. What the official reports recorded was the outcome. At minute 37, the coordinated action by the 3 factions in Al-Rashid ceased, not reduced. Ceased. Checkpoints disassembled. Armed personnel began withdrawing from elevated positions. The pressure on all 8 Marine positions simultaneously reduced to 0. At minute 39, Zara transmitted to General Drake. She said, "Stand down the relief convoy. It's over." Drake's response took 5 seconds. Then he said, "What did you do?" Zara said, "I had a conversation." He said, "A conversation." She said, Qasim's cooperation with the other 2 factions was contingent on them delivering something he needed. I offered him something better and pointed out that If 480 Marines died in Al-Rashid today, what came next would be significantly worse for everyone in this city than anything the Allied government had done. He's a practical man. Drake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How did you know he'd listen?" Zara said, "Because he's been trying to find a way out of this coalition for 6 weeks. He needed someone to give him a reason. I gave him 3. She climbed back to the warehouse roof while the city slowly, cautiously came back to something resembling stillness around her. Dominique was standing at the parapet, watching the factions withdraw. She looked at Zara and said, "You were gone 11 minutes. I know. We had no idea where you were." "I know." Dominique shook her head. "You couldn't have told someone your plan." "I didn't have time." "You never have time." Zara sat down with her back against the parapet. For the first time since 6 that morning, she allowed herself to be still. The sun was moving west. The gunfire had stopped completely. Somewhere below in the warehouse, she could hear the grandmother's prayers, which had changed tone, quieter now, less urgent. She looked at her hands. They were steady. They were always steady. She didn't know if that was training or something she'd been born with or just the way the years had reshaped her. She suspected it didn't matter. Tund appeared from the stairway door and sat down a few feet away. He looked out over the city. After a while he said, 480 Marines. "Yes," Zara said. He was quiet. "Then are all 8 positions accounted for?" "Confirmed," Zara said. "Full headcount came in at minute 38. No fatalities. 7 wounded, 2 serious. Medevac is en route." Tund nodded slowly. He looked at the city for a long moment. Then he said, "That 60-character message to Drake. What were the other characters you didn't use?" Zara looked at him. Then she almost smiled, which for her was the equivalent of anyone else laughing. She said, "Please." Tund did laugh. Just once. Then they sat in the cooling afternoon while the city of Al-Rashid settled around them, and somewhere 40 kilometers away General Drake was presumably sitting down for the first time in 4 hours and beginning the process of writing a report that would take him 3 days and still not fully explain what had happened here. The relief convoy arrived at minute 43. Drake had sent it at minute 38 before she'd called him, because he knew her and he'd decided to trust her. The convoy came in unopposed. The Marines from all 8 positions consolidated at the warehouse and the 2 adjacent buildings. A head count confirmed what the radio had already told her. Nobody lost. When Drake arrived personally at minute 51, he stepped out of the lead vehicle, walked directly to Zara, and looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "A conversation." She said, "Sir." He said, "You walked into a building with 3 of my Marines and a civilian, and you had a conversation with the man running this operation, and it ended." She said, "That's correct." He said, "I want a full debrief, every detail." She said, "Yes, sir." He said, "And Akafur?" She said, "Sir." He looked at her for another moment. The glacier expression, the quiet voice, the eyes that were already moving to the next problem while everyone around her was still processing the last one. He said, "Good work." She said, "Thank you, sir." She meant it. She also meant the next thing she said, which was, "I need to talk to you about the intelligence failure that made this possible. Because whoever our contact was working for, it wasn't us, and it hasn't stopped being a problem just because today is over." Drake looked at her. "Of course you do." She said, "Give me 20 minutes to check on the wounded. Then I'd like an hour." He said, "You've got 90 minutes, and Akafur, eat something first." She said, "Yes, sir." She was already walking toward the medevac point. She sat with the 2 seriously wounded Marines while the medics worked. She didn't talk. She just sat close enough that they knew someone was there. It was something she'd learned early, that presence mattered in a way that words often didn't, that sometimes the most important thing you could give someone was the knowledge that they were not alone in a difficult place. When the medevac lifted off, she stood and watched it go. The sun was getting low. The city below the rooftop was beginning to make the sounds that cities made when they returned to themselves after being held under pressure, traffic, voices, a radio somewhere playing music. Dominique appeared next to her. 480, she said. And 14 civilians, Zara said. Dominique nodded. She looked at the medevac until it disappeared. Then she said, for what it's worth, I'd follow you anywhere. Zara looked at her. Then she said, I know, which is why I try not to go anywhere stupid. Dominique laughed. Today wasn't stupid. Today was calculated, Zara said. There's a difference. They stood on the roof as the sun went down over Al-Rashid, this city that had tried to swallow 480 people and failed. This city that would go on being complicated and contested, and alive the way cities always did regardless of what armies did inside them. Below them, Marines were checking equipment and calling home and eating whatever food could be found. Farid was somewhere in the warehouse explaining something to someone with gestures. The grandmother had apparently finally stopped praying, or perhaps had simply switched to a quieter form. Zara thought about the bakery, about Qasim, who was a practical man in an impractical situation looking for a door, about the fourth language Annan spoke that had opened the room before anything else had a chance to close it, about the 60 characters she'd sent to Drake that contained, distilled to their essence, everything that mattered about the situation. She thought about the 7 problems she'd walked onto this roof with, and the fact that all 7 of them now had solutions, or were in the process of having solutions. She thought about the 22-year-old corporal who hadn't said more than 40 words all day, and who had made the single most precise and important contribution to keeping 480 people alive, and who was currently, she noted, asleep against the north parapet with his rifle across his knees. She let him sleep. She had a debrief to get to. She had an intelligence failure to unpack. She had reports to write and a general to brief, and 7 wounded Marines to check on in the morning, and a contact somewhere in this network who was going to be extremely surprised to learn that the operation they'd helped engineer had not produced the outcome anyone expected. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That was fine. Work was something she understood. Work was something she could do something about. She took one more look at the city below. 480 Marines, 14 civilians, 3 children who were probably by now asleep somewhere in this building. Nobody lost. She turned away from the parapet and walked toward the stairs.